Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It is Vanna over at the ASDC. We are running a little bit behind. One of our attendees is having, or one of our panelists is having some technical difficulties this evening, but we are excited to be underway with the second half of our grassroots organizing series, which will, of course, focus on engaging constituency groups, as you can see there on your screen. Again, welcome to you all. We are excited that our T3 program continues to grow. Every single day we are getting more and more people registered for the program, so we're just excited for the direction that we're going in. As I mentioned, this is part 2 of our grassroots organizing series. Part 1, of course, was on Monday, where we discussed how to recruit and engage volunteers. We will build on that today and share tools and best practices for engaging key constituency groups in your state. I know on Monday we talked about how to recruit people, how to get them into the fold, how to set up canvases and run phone banks. We'll build off of that and talk about more ways that we can engage some of the key constituency groups in your respective states. I know that for many states, 2017 is considered an off year, but we want to make sure that you all have the tools that you need to take advantage of this year to focus on local party building and just getting more Democrats into the fold. As you can see there on your screen, both in writing and in person, we are pleased to be joined by Jaleesa Washington, who is the director of the Office of Diversity for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And we are also joined tonight by DNC Vice Chair and New York Assemblyman Michael Blake. He is on the line with us as well. He will come on at the conclusion of Jaleesa's presentation to talk to us more about constituency organizing. But before we begin, I would like to go over a few friendly reminders. Jaleesa, if you'll advance us there. Couple of friendly reminders for you. First things first, you all are in listen-only mode, but we don't want to discourage you from asking questions. So feel free to ask questions by typing them into the questions box there, as you can see on your GoToWebinar module. Type your questions in, and we will get them asked of both Jaleesa and Vice Chair Michael Blake. For those of you who may be having trouble seeing the questions box, the little orange arrow there that you can see sticking out from the GoToWebinar module, sometimes that will minimize the questions box. So if so, just press that little orange arrow and the questions box will pop out and be maximized. So that is how you can engage and ask questions. As always, we invite you to connect with us via social media. The ASDC's Twitter handle is @DemChair. So if you are not already following the ASDC, please do so. And then, as always, go ahead and excuse me, tweet out using our hashtag ASDCT3. Let people out in the states know that we are underway with part 2 of our grassroots organizing series. Get some excitement out there in Twitterland. I always like to retweet some of the tweets that I see out there. So continue tweeting, letting people know that we are training Democrats up to win both this year and next. And a couple more friendly reminders for you. If you are watching our webinars with a group of friends, and I'll repeat this at the conclusion of the webinar for folks who are late jumping on, if you're watching our webinars with a group of friends, I would encourage you, if you yourself are not the person logged into the webinar, to please complete the corresponding quiz for the webinar. If not, we have no other way of knowing whether or not you actually attended or whether or not you are participating. So if you're watching it with a group, please complete the quiz so that we can make sure you get credit for the session. And then another friendly reminder that I want to remind you all of, Jaleesa, if you'll move on to the next slide as well. I know that sometimes you all will have trouble viewing our presentations. The GoToWebinar module automatically defaults to about 79% viewing, so just always increase the size of the screen to 100% so that you can have a better view. We don't want you all missing anything throughout our webinars. And then lastly, one of the last things I want to mention, of course, are our pop quizzes throughout our webinars. If you all make sure you stay alert throughout our webinars, we'll announce pop quizzes, we'll announce a question, and the first person to type the answer into the questions box will win a small prize from the ASCC. So make sure you stay alert, be ready to answer our pop quiz. You'll see the slide come up on the screen when it's time for our pop quiz. So just make sure you are alert and paying attention. So with that, I am going to go ahead and go over the agenda before I kick it off to Jaleesa, or before I turn it over to Jaleesa. Again, we will focus on engaging key constituency groups. First things first, I've already given my welcome and friendly reminders. Secondly, we will talk about expanding your base. Jaleesa will be with us to talk about that. She'll talk about recruiting messengers out in the states, and then she'll talk a little bit about the importance of diversity and inclusion. After that, she will take some questions, and then we'll be joined by DNC Vice Chair Michael Blake. And then following his presentation, we will also open up the floor for questions again. So that will be the flow of today's webinar. So feel free to ask questions throughout, again, as I mentioned. But without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Jaleesa Washington, again, who is again the Director of the Office of Diversity over at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. So Jaleesa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Vanna. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jaleesa Washington. Again, I'm the Diversity Director at the DCCC. Last cycle, I served as the South Carolina Political Director during the primary for Hillary Clinton, and also as the Regional Political Director for the general election, also for Hillary Clinton. So today I'm going to talk about engaging constituency groups in non-presidential years.
And Jaleesa, if I can, I'm sorry to hop in here. We lost you via webcam for some reason.
Let's see if I can bring
want to try to get it back up.
How about now?
There we are. We can see you now.
Right.
Thank you.
Perfect. A quick overview of the presentation today. We all know elections are more attractive during presidential campaign years. Many states have more resources, more surrogates, and more staff to help engage key constituency groups. I'm going to discuss or give a few tips to help engage key groups during non-presidential campaign years. Tips for engagement: be creative, be strategic, and be inclusive. Different states have key constituency groups that are needed to turn out the vote in their state. In non-presidential years, state and local parties can use this time to be creative to expand their base. In an effort to expand your base, think through all local and statewide organizations that have relationships with the target constituency groups. This is a great time to start engaging these organizations around local and state issues and candidates. These groups can consist of neighborhood associations, religious organizations, social clubs, environmental organizations, and college clubs and organizations. You should think broadly and outside the box to engage key groups. You can also use this time to build, strengthen, and empower your Democratic clubs and caucuses. For many of us, we know our Democratic clubs and caucuses should serve as the outreach arm for your state parties. Use the time in non-presidential years to build new clubs and target your constituency base. Also use this time to strengthen and empower existing caucuses and clubs. And you can do this by a number of things. First, by throwing house parties and interest meetings around the state. You can organize planning workshops and retreats. In these workshops and retreats, we can come out of it with outreach plans to help us engage our base. And you should invite out-of-state speakers and trainers to events that can engage some of these key groups. Next step, be strategic. Being strategic in our outreach plan is key when targeting these groups. Having the right messenger is an important tool for your outreach. So make sure you recruit your messengers. Recruiting the right messenger to deliver your party's platform is key to key groups. These individuals can act as surrogates in your targeted communities. You should build a broad surrogates list. The surrogate list can consist of local elected officials, community leaders, and stakeholders to help deliver your message. Your list should include individuals who have built trust in the communities you are targeting. You should have regular strategic messaging meetings with your surrogates to meet outreach goals. Having regular strategic messaging meetings with surrogates can be helpful when they're out talking to various communities. Transfer the energy. Use the energy from presidential elections to capture enthusiasm for local, state, and federal elections. You can do this by debriefing with presidential campaign staff. We know a lot of times presidential campaign staff that come in states are sometimes from different states. Use this time to debrief with campaign staff that may be leaving and learn what tools and activities were done to engage key constituent groups during the presidential years. And use this time to continue engagement with people who weren't necessarily involved before the presidential election. Find ways to integrate them in activities taking place in your local and state parties. Be inclusive. Diversity and inclusion is key. The best way to engage is to recruit your party's leadership and staff from your targeted constituent groups. Make an effort to add diversity in not only your party leadership, but also in your staff and in the vendor and consultants you hire. Become the convener. Many national organizations are building state and local chapters around the country. Organizations like Indivisible and Emerge America are expanding nationally. Allow your state and local parties to become the convener of other state and local ally groups. You can offer office space for meetings and events. Offer your email list for events and meeting invites, and offer volunteer support. This will better build your relationships with key organizations and members in those organizations. Those are some quick tips to engage better in non-presidential years. Again, my name is Jaleesa Washington. I'd love to open the floor up for questions.
Great. Thank you, Jaleesa. We have a number of questions here, and you all feel free to ask them. We definitely wanted to make sure you all had tips, received tips that you all could use in the states. Jaleesa, one of the first questions, how do you know if a volunteer is one of the right messengers? Meaning, what does a good messenger do or say?
I think a good messenger has a broad network base. If you can tap into that volunteers network, find out if they have church organizations that they're a part of, or clubs or social clubs that they're a part of, sitting down and talking to them and giving them key talking points, they can be good messengers for your state and local parties.
Another question here is, can you review how to best target a surrogate? Any ideas to keep them engaged?
Yeah, most definitely. The best way to target surrogates, elected officials are good surrogates, local surrogates in our states. A lot of times state parties don't necessarily coordinate with elected officials in their state to strategically go over messaging points. Bringing in elected officials or community leaders to go over strategic messaging for your state party is always important and can be beneficial for you and the party when they're out talking to their community. Easy list is always starting off with elected officials and community leaders.
Great. Another question here, just about regional differences that you've noticed, Jaleesa, as you are in your position. What regional differences do you find as you're organizing in the various states and in specific communities?
Yeah, most definitely. So my background, like I said, I came from South Carolina as a political director. We have a pretty large African American population in our Democratic Party. So building upon that information, we were able to do a number of outreach to churches, African American organizations like the NAACP and Urban League are always good groups to start with. In Ohio, we have a huge labor population. So starting with groups like that is always good. Doing your research in the states is important. Finding out your population, your demographics, and your targeted audience is key when you're doing your outreach.
Great. Give me just a second here. We do have a number of questions. a clarifying question here. What do you mean by debrief? I think that you mentioned debriefing on one of the slides, maybe
Yeah,
debriefing following a presidential. Could you speak more about what you meant
most
by that?
definitely. Most definitely. Again, like I said, I originally from South Carolina, but I also worked in states like Ohio and Oregon. So after I did a lot of work in those states for my presidential campaign, I then moved on to DC when I became the diversity director at DCCC. I capture a lot of information that I didn't necessarily share with the state parties that I left. I think it's always good if state parties can have a session or a debriefing with staff that are leaving their state that have done work in presidential campaigns that can give tips for the next election cycle, and also keeping those relationships evolving while people move on to different careers, I think is also key. I built a lot of relationships in different states, and it's always good to know what's going on in the states that I work in, and the people who helped me during the presidential campaign, keeping them engaged with their state party is always key.
Perfect. Another question in reference to groups like Indivisible.
Mhm.
Um, the question is, groups like Indivisible are not technically democratic. Here in North Dakota, they make a point of differentiating and stating that they're progressive. Any tips for our attendees on melding these, our efforts with their mindset, essentially how to coordinate with those groups?
Yeah, most definitely. And again, different groups are unique to different states. I think it's always good to have conversations. In some states, a partnership may not work, but it's always good to have a conversation to see where you can collaborate on certain things. Doing your research is always key, finding out which group is unique to your state and which can be helpful to your efforts. Great question.
Yes. Another question, speaking of Indivisible, besides them, who are some other groups that we can engage and invite?
Yeah, most definitely. I also mentioned Emerge America. I know they're expanding nationally in a lot of states. Planned Parenthood is always a great one. Um, your local, a lot of times, a lot of these groups may be nonpartisan, but it's always good to include them for awareness. They may have members that may be interested in joining your state or local party, but may not know necessarily how to get involved. So if a lot of these organizations align with the Democratic Party's platform, it's always good to engage them and keep them in the loop for awareness. Again, a lot of these organizations are unique to certain states. Having a good outreach person or a good political person that can kind of decipher through those groups and organizations is always good.
Great. I see that someone here is asking about tips for engaging new groups that came out of the Women's March. I know that Vice Chair Michael Blake, he'll be joining us shortly. I know that that is included in his presentation, so I know that he will touch on that. So hold that question, and it will get covered here in just a few minutes. A couple more questions here, Jaleesa, and then I want to get Michael Blake on in just a few minutes.
Yeah, most
Let's
definitely.
see. Um,
Should I?
Couple other questions here. I know that we talked about surrogates earlier, and someone here had a follow-up just talking a little bit more about surrogates or what that
Mhm.
process looks like for
Yeah,
folks out in the States, or T3 participants out in the States to sort of recruit surrogates to be visible in the States, what that looks
yeah.
like.
Yeah, most definitely. I know a lot of times when we think about surrogates, especially when you're thinking about presidential election years, you think of national surrogates. But a lot of times we have state surrogates, state and local surrogates that we can use for our state and local parties. Um, I think a good strategy is using surrogates from different regions to travel to different regions of your state. You may have a state house rep or a county council member from a different part of your state that could be a surrogate in another part of your state. I think aligning those folks with communities around your state is a good strategy. Again, having those meetings where you can go over messaging and making sure everyone is on the same talking page, sharing talking points, and developing strategic messaging around the state is important. And a lot of these organizations too that are coming in may be a good surrogate for the Democratic Party as well.
Perfect. Give me just a second. Do you have any tips for a good agenda or a good agenda or process on having a strategic messaging meeting with these various groups?
Yeah, most definitely. Again, I'll reiterate, you know, depending on your state, your messaging has to be unique to your state and the base that you're trying to reach. I think having a collective conversation with different organizations and individuals that can talk about issues that affect the community that you're trying to reach is always important. Um, Having an inclusive conversation can help with that, depending on the state that you're in. So more conversations and having conversations often is important.
Okay, one more question here, and then we will turn it over to Michael Blake here in just a second. Give me just a second. The Democratic, so speaking to some of our red states, we've got a number of questions from our red states. And this is just a general question that sort of covers about 10 questions in the questions box. How can we get the Democratic Party energized to build a base in some of these red states or some of these red areas?
Yeah, most definitely. Engagement, engagement, engagement. I come from a red state. I think some of the things that we were able to do great in South Carolina is to keep having meetings and conversations. We need to reach and talk outside of the Democratic Party. That's the importance of building relationships with some of these groups that we might not necessarily think about before. I think we have to go outside the party and bring people in. We know that we're an inclusive party. We just have to get our message out there. There's hope for the red states.
Yes, absolutely hope for the red states. So Jaleesa, thank you for joining us. I know that we have split this webinar to hear from two different people and two different perspectives, but we definitely appreciate your time with us this afternoon. And if you'll advance on, I'm going to do a quick pop quiz question before we turn it over to Vice Chair Michael Blake here. So if you all are ready, I will do a quick pop quiz question for you. Jaleesa mentioned several ways that you can become the convener. What is one of those ways that you can become the convener? Kind of a more difficult pop quiz question here, but we'll see. All righty, let's see what we have here. Let's see our answers here. Give me just a second here. I know that offer up meeting space was one, and it looks like K Springer or Springer K is how your name is listed in the questions box. I don't know which is the first and which is the last, but if you will type your address into the questions box, we will send you out a prize from the ASDC. There were a number of different answers. There was offer office space for meetings, offer your email for events and meeting invites, and then offer volunteer support. So those were some of the ways that you can become the convener. So again, Jaleesa, thank you so much. I believe that Vice Chair Michael Blake is on. If you can hear us, Michael, will you acknowledge it? And I'm going to yank the screen back over to get Vice Chair Michael Blake's PowerPoint up and running. So thanks again, Jaleesa. Have
Thank you,
a great
guys.
rest of your day. And
Thank
thanks
you.
for
Enjoyed
joining
it.
us. We will continue on here with the next part of our webinar. And Vice Chair Blake, as soon as you can hear me, if you will acknowledge so.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, good evening. There you are. We can hear you. So we are going to get your presentation up and running here. All righty, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you. Again, for those of you who may have been late joining us this afternoon, the second half of our webinar, DNC Vice Chair and New York Assemblyman Michael Blake will continue to talk about coalition building in the state. So Michael, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And I can't see you in reverse. So can you all, you seeing the screens or seeing me on the screen? I'm just trying to figure that out.
We are seeing the slides. We don't have your webcam going here.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out. It's not showing me how to, it's only showing me Jaleesa's webcam and saying I'm connected. So.
Oh, well, as long as you are connected, we don't have to see you there. We can
okay.
push forward.
Well, good evening, everybody. It is good to connect with you on this evening. For those I'm meeting for the first time, my name is Michael Blake. I'm one of your newly elected vice chairs of the DNC. I am also in my second term in the State Assembly in New York. We represent the most diverse county in the country in the Bronx, according to the census. But I always remind everyone that when you leave New York City, there's still 10 million people that are outside of the city. So we see it in all different perspectives, urban, rural, and suburban, and all those different aspects. And so the intent of this conversation is how do we engage on the ground? How do we help you with training on the ground? How do we make sure it's impactful, especially in this environment where there's incredible energy that exists across the country, where people want to be involved and they're looking for ways to get involved. So we can advance the slides from here. We're going to talk through ways to get people mobilized in this way. So first, I just want to convey, if there's anything that I shared that you have interest in, you want to follow up with us on, our Twitter handle is @MrMikeBlake. @MrMikeBlake. Feel free to drop us a note if you have questions to send us afterwards. You can feel free to send me an email, very simply, mb79@dnc.org, mb79@dnc.org itself. We think about movements. We think about training. We think about mobilization. There are many trainings that are happening across the country and across the world, as you saw in that previous slide. And that's what brings us to this slide right here, that if we really want to move the needle, we have to think about shared value, shared responsibility, shared benefits. I heard that in 2003 by President Clinton. And it really resonated with me, and it stuck with me. And I thought about all the different energy that's happening across the country: swing left, flippable, indivisible, our revolution, the current Democratic Party and state and the county, all our different aspects that happen. If we want people to really feel engaged and be excited to be engaged, then we have to first have a connection on that shared value. You know, that shared value of fighting for better jobs, that shared value of fighting for someone's kid. You think about the Jimmy Kimmel monologue that happened, the energy that came from that. You know, that wasn't about policy first and foremost. That was about his kid. That was about his family itself. You know, the shared value of equity, the shared value of education, all these different aspects. The shared responsibilities that we all have to have in these conversations. And so when you're engaging with people on the ground, how do you say, you know, look, we all care about our kids having better opportunities. That's the shared value. Our shared responsibility is to go out to vote and to be mobilized and making phone calls and knocking on doors and reaching out to our elected officials and other leaders. That's our responsibility. And our shared benefit is that we'll have better access to funding for our schools. We'll have better healthcare opportunities. We'll have better advocacy that will happen in our communities. And I would really encourage you, whenever you possibly can, that when you're having the conversations, to be able to mobilize and get people involved and engaged, to think about it that way. What is the shared value? What is the shared responsibility? What is the shared benefit? Which leads us to the next slide, next conversation itself. You think about the success that has happened just this year alone, the Women's March, 6 million women and allies across the world, the rejection of guiding office on congressional ethics, the blocking of the travel ban, the rejecting of the repeal of ACA, which they're now trying to come back to do again, the March for Science. All of these are efforts that happen and that we demonstrate that we're able to be successful. Why? Because we demonstrated the shared value of, regardless of if someone was pro-choice or pro-life, that we can respect women and we should respect women. That I can be very clear that I'm a man and I'm still a feminist, and be very clear about standing up for equity and standing up for opportunities and justice. The shared responsibility of us being a part of the march and saying we're going to be engaged thereafter, after the march, the 10 actions for 100 days, the shared benefits. It wasn't just the rejection of misogynistic language that was being utilized. It was about how do we uplift and empower ourselves to come together. You think about how and why we're able to keep mobilizing. It was the shared value of demonstrating that, you know what, everyone should have an opportunity to have access to health care. Everyone should understand the way to make phone calls to our respective offices. The benefits that we were able to have the rejection of the repeal. They're coming back again. The continual action and activities that have to continue from there demonstrates that we've had success, and it's important to communicate that we're in this space because we didn't win the election in 2016, but let's be clear, it was an election, it was not eternity. It was one day. It was a day that woke us up and has us focused and has us talking about conversations of the resistance and mobilizing and training people and getting people involved in a very concrete way. And so the rest of this conversation is going to focus on how do we take that energy that exists all across the country, our states, our territories, etc., and mobilize it into concrete activism and action to help you grow your parties. Next slide, please. So when we think about how do we do this, the coalition we were able to build before, numerous constituency groups, united under the common theme, built a sustained organizing platform. We were able to say, you know what, we may come from different backgrounds, you know, but we can still have the same end goal. We may have different journeys and different paths of how we get there, rather, but we have the same end journey. So when we talk about the economics of it all, when we talk about how, you know what, we can all talk about how we fight for the working class. We can all talk about how we want good paying jobs. We can all talk about how we want opportunities for our families. You know, I may come from an urban community, you may come from a rural community, you may come from a suburban community, but we all want economic opportunity. I may come from a black community, you may come from a Latino community, you may come from a white community, you may come from an Asian community, you may come from a Native American community, no matter what it may be, but we all fight for those opportunities. And in the respective understanding that we have different parts, but we're part of the whole. And so as we're building this out, recognize that there will be many people that are democratically leaning in their ideology and agree with our policies and our values, but they may not be aligned with the Democratic Party. And we cannot make someone feel bad because they haven't been a part of the party before. Maybe they didn't feel welcome. Maybe they didn't feel encouraged. Think about other organizations in your local communities, whether it be the church, whether it be the school, whether it be a nonprofit, whether it be the community group. You could have people that agree with your philosophies, but maybe there's been something that made them uncomfortable. Maybe something happened in their past. Maybe something happened in their present. And so it's our job to educate people and say that, you know what, there are reasons we want people to mobilize with us, to vote for us, and not be against the other guys and the other women. You know, we can't continue to say, well, the Republicans are bad. That's not enough. It's not sufficient. We have to have people excited to say, you know what, this is why I want to be involved. This is why I want to get engaged. And in order to be successful, I need training. The best analogies I try to make around this, next slide please, is to say to people, you know what, if I want to get a job down the line, then I have to go to school. If I want to get better in the workplace, then I have to go through training. If I want to be a better employee, I have to have professional development. So in that exact same manner, if I want to be better at being engaged on the ground and mobilizing people on the ground, then I have to focus on training. I have to mobilize around training. That's why I'm so passionate around organizations like New Leaders Council, which is saying in an op-ed that Mark Riddle wrote. I would encourage all of you to go and find the op-ed in U.S. News that was written about a week ago about how the Republicans have essentially done training and resource around training 10-1 to the Democrats. It's a necessity of empowering our pipeline. And so how do we do that? 4 different ways. Number 1, ensure aligned impact and aligned goals. Try to have similar opportunities and impact, even if you have different goals, if you will. So look, you know, 400 organizations came together for the Women's March. We recognize that. Great opportunity, empowering opportunity. You think about how Bob Bland, Tamika Mallory, Linda Sarsour, Carmen Perez were able to mobilize people from around the country and around the world. And so different perspectives, different ideologies, different philosophies, but we recognize that, you know, there may have been individual goals when we came to the table, but we're going to have a one big picture goal, what we're trying to achieve. And being very clear in communicating that there's a difference between goals and objectives. And a goal for us in New York was passing Raise the Age. We wanted to change it so that 16 and 17-year-olds were not tried as adults any longer. The partnership with the Raise the Age Coalition of 132 organizations, 28,000 youth being impacted. The objectives or the benchmarks meant the metrics, the tangible, clear items. So differentiate that. Goal. We want to increase the amount of people. We want to increase who is being trained in our programs. Objective. We want to have 100 new people trained. Goal. We want to have 1,000 people out by the end of the year because we feel that it will give us a chance to be able to win elections next year. The objective, we're going to have trainings once a month. So making clear how to differentiate those elements and being very specific about that. Next up, a slide, please. So how do you map out your assets? Why do you need to do this? It's the rule that we talk about often, the rule of the 5 Ps. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. It's the rule of what we talk about, 7 contacts. There's a reason why you get as much mail that you do around election time, ladies and gentlemen. It's because there's been enough studies to indicate that someone needs to be contacted usually 7 times, to see a name 7 times before they'll even remember the name. They may not remember the message and all the details, but there's enough repetition there that they'll gather it, you know, itself. Remember the other point of 7 words. Determine end goals and then work backwards. Determine end goals and then work backwards. Why and how? You do that through map your assets. That means let's understand the resources that we have versus what they have. Let's understand what's available to us. Rock the Vote partners with news organizations, artists, actors, actresses, push youth engagement, voting, etc. So you're thinking about in your local community. You're trying to find out how to do this. Identify the gaps in collective resources and use the opportunity for additional partnerships. So I'm trying to engage in my state party. Okay, I see that we have an election coming up and municipal elections happening this year. We have statewide elections happening next year. We started to realize, okay, what are the assets that we have? Well, okay, we have 44 organizations that are focused on voter engagement. We have 6 organizations that are more focused on training. We have 7 organizations that are very good at message development and communicating a message. We have 16 organizations we have identified that are good for fundraising. Okay, we've mapped this out so that when we can then determine our goals and our gaps there. What do we have to fill in? So we've mapped this out. We've seen that, you know what, we're not really seeing that we have a lot of lawyers that are part of this that can help with voter protection. We've mapped this out, and we've seen that we actually don't have a lot of people that are good at copy editing that can make edits on the press releases. We've mapped this out, and we've seen that we may not have enough people that have good success in knocking on doors in rural communities. We've mapped this out, and we've seen that we don't have enough representation and inclusion and diversity, and that of our 10 leaders that are there, that we only have 1 woman and 1 person of color. And so the reason why you want to start mapping out your assets, because then you start to see, okay, here's what I'm trying to achieve. Here's what I'm truly trying to achieve. Here's what we have in our toolbox rather. And now here are the gaps that we have to fill. So we can be much more strategic in how we do that. And so next slide, please. If you want to figure out how you achieve that and do that, recognize the different lanes on the highway. What do I mean? Multiple lanes on the highway, same going in the same direction, though. Entities that work together to challenge the travel ban provide counsel for plaintiffs, each providing a unique expertise, all these different groups. So how does this relate? One of my pastors used to tell me this years ago in Illinois. He said, Michael, you could take I-94, you could take Lakeshore Drive, you could take the train, you could drive, you could do all these different items and ways to travel. However, it's the same end destination to get to the museum. It's the same end destination to go to the park. So what do I say by that? We have to be comfortable, everybody, that ways we've been doing things in the past may not be right for right now. And we have to be accepting, willing for changes, and to try different perspectives, because it's about getting to the end goal and the objectives that we're seeking. That may mean that, you know what, I've had the event in the exact same manner for the last 4 years. Well, let me go to a different location. That may mean that I'm used to just focusing on knocking on doors in this manner. Well, maybe we have to change how we do our messaging, our training in that manner. That may mean going out and engaging with high school students who will be 18 at the time of voting, but making that a part of your program. That may mean dividing up and separating out strategies so that you're not just talking to the base of communities of color and women and LGBTQ and veterans and millennials 4 weeks before an election, but all of the time. And so it's crossing over into other lanes, and out of necessity, it's understanding that you're gonna have to do things differently. All of us will. The reality is this. We have new leadership. We have this new opportunity because we didn't win last year. And so we have to use this crisis as an opportunity. We have to be clear about creating different metrics and different opportunities in that manner. So next slide, please. So what does that then mean? Where does it go from here? So assess and measure your progress. Continual communication. It is easy to be committed to be building together without checking in on progress. We have to be clearer and better about our progress, everyone. We have to. We cannot just say we're doing well. That doesn't mean anything. I would always tell my team that if you tell me something ends in a 0 and a 5, I don't believe you. Because the likelihood that something ends in a 0 and a 5, we're talking about knocking on doors or raising money or making phone calls, is not really likely than it not ending in a 0 and a 5. So establish and commit to metrics and establish those measurements. Be very clear about that. So going back to what I said earlier, determine end goals and then working backwards. If we go into the community and we say, you know what, we know in order to win this race in this county, we have a county sheriff race, a county executive race that's coming up. Okay, we know for flat numbers' sake, it's going to take 2,500 people voting for our candidate. We know in order to do that, we need to prepare to having 2,800 supporters in our bucket in that manner. In order to do that, we have to do a step back to really assess, okay, we need 2,800 identified supporters. We're going to be canvassing and making phone calls for the next 4 months. Okay, how many do we need to pick up per day? And then figuring out, okay, We're going to be very clear day by day by day by day by the metrics and the measurement of that progress. You don't go into your job saying, you know what, I just hope that I do well. No, you want to see progress. You don't want your child to just say, well, I think I'm learning. No, you want to see progress. So it's about being clear about that, and we have to be very clear about that and how we determine measurable progress on the ground. Next slide, please. So if we want to figure out how we make that progress, how do you build these long-lasting coalitions? Next slide, please. It's then demonstrating what do we have to be doing? We're the ones we've been waiting for. You got to figure out the ways in that manner. It's a book that I read years ago, going back to those values and getting people engaged, getting people involved. And so talking to people and saying, you know what? You may have never been involved in politics ever before, but you feel mobilized now. Ask the person the following things. Number one, find your why. What is your why? Find your why. My why is that my mama was homeless in Jamaica, and I'm the son of Jamaican immigrants. My daddy was in labor at 1199 SAIU. My daddy mopped hospital floors in the Bronx, New York. My mama worked at a manufacturing plant for 40 years. I was born with a heart murmur, and I had a near-fatal car accident when I fell asleep at the wheel. I went to PS 79, which was in the book Jonathan Kozel, Savage Inequality, Children of American Schools. My why is that for some reason God has allowed me to still be here, to be present, and I want to give back to my community in the Bronx, New York. I want to find a way to be able to help people because I was that kid that came from that rough neighborhood that they didn't think could make it, so I want to help that other kid so that they have a chance to make it. That's my why. Talk to someone about their why when they come into your office, when they come into your Democratic County Committee event, when they come into your county party meeting, when they come to your headquarters, and ask them, what's your background? What's your skill and what's your service? Your background's in communications? Great. You can help us in writing talking points. You can help us in writing press releases. Your background's in fundraising? Outstanding. We need help in figuring out grassroots fundraising and figuring out ways to mobilize people all throughout the course of the year, not just through our one dinner that we may have in the year. You're a lawyer. Fantastic. We need help in thinking about voter protection and how to make sure we're engaging with the Secretary of State and the Attorney General and other allies that are here. You're a people person. You may not know exactly what that is. No problem. We need people to help us with organizing and canvassing and going out and knocking on doors and making phone calls. No matter what your background is, you have a skill. So your background could be the communications industry. Your skill could be being an orator. Your service will be that you will be our volunteer press secretary who will be helping us as we're messaging out. Your background could be that you are excellent at management and structure, and you come from a consulting background. Your skill, you're really effective at budgeting. Your service, you're going to help us as we're going through our budgeting process for our party in this manner, in that way. And so we want for people to be thinking about right now, whether it be all the mobilizing energy that's out there, from the Bernie Sanders Democrats, the Obama Democrats, the Hillary Democrats, the third-party voters, the people that might have voted at all, that there's an energy out there. And so our job is to meet people where they're at, meet them where they're at, meet them where they are at, engage with them and build that relationship with them and say, okay, you know what? Let's start the conversation. Let's figure out what are you interested in? What brought you here? What brought you in today? Is it healthcare? Is it education? Is it jobs? Is it the military? Whatever it may be. But also, we have to go out and go meet people. So that means we have to go out and ask our friends who have the relationships with the local radio stations so that we can get people who are trusted voices to be on the radio to encourage people to be out there. Who are the people that can go out and mobilize with their respective nonprofits? Who are the people that can engage in all these different ways? And always have an ask and a call to action. The most effective emails that you can send have one ask. One ask, not multiple asks. People get confused, they get lost with that. Have a clear call to action. Every event that you're doing, every activation you're doing, what is the call to action? Signing people up, capturing their data, capturing information, but then continuing to build that relationship. We have to go into rural communities and re-engage. We have to go to the laborers, brothers and sisters, and re-engage. We have to have real conversations around race and say to all communities that we respect one another and we will re-engage. We have to have conversations around faith and justice and that responsibility that all of us are looking for the same things, even if you're atheist or agnostic, re-engage. We have to be real about standing up for women's rights and re-engage. We have to say that we are fighting for positive things. We are fighting for opportunity. We are fighting for access. That is what will encourage people, inspire people to get in the game. So the reason why I show you this book is a book that has had so much impact on my life, because the last line of it says, we are the ones we've been waiting for. We have to go out there and encourage people and say, we are the ones we've been waiting for. We have to be mobilized in that way. And so if we take these steps to recap, 5 P's. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. 7 words, determine end goals and work backwards. 7 contacts, you need to find people 7 times to be able to engage in that way. Understanding that there are differences between goals and objectives. Understanding that there are democratic leaning people that may agree with our policies, but they're not aligned with the party, so we have to meet them where they're at. We meet them where they're at. We have to say, find your why and what is your why, to understand the differences between the background, the skill, and the service. That is how we're going to mobilize and have training that is effective on the ground. And we have to make sure that we take the time to listen to people on the ground. Listen to the people that voted for Bernie Sanders. Listen to the people that are mobilizing in these different ways. So many times, people may not want to be engaged in this particular manner. It's our job to find ways to mobilize, but it's also our job to excite people. And I'll stop there and say thank you very much, and I'm happy to take your questions at this time.
Great. Excellent information. Thank you so much, Vice Chairman. Hopefully I know that you gave our folks a lot to take in and a lot to write down. And I will ask at the end here, your audio was breaking up just a little bit. I believe it was due to your Wi-Fi perhaps. So I'm going to get a 1-pager from you on these 5 points that I can distribute to our attendees, share with them so that they can have that on paper. I'll reach out to your team for that, but I want to make sure that people were able to get those points if they couldn't hear you here at the end. But as you can imagine, we've got several questions, so let me dive right in and get to some of the questions here. Give me just a second. Give me just a second. I want to get to some that are not the same as some of the questions we had earlier. Great question here. What are good, effective messages for populations who are not aware of the importance of civic engagement? For example, immigrants who are new to citizenship. How do we get people like that engaged?
I think immigration and the conversation around immigration is a perfect way. You know, people may not feel engaged because they have felt the policies don't matter to them. But right now, you know, Donald Trump and the Republicans are making it easy for us to mobilize people around how politics and policy impact your lives. And so ask people, you know, what do you care about? What is your issue? You know, is it immigration? Is it women's rights? Is it student loans? Is it Meals on Wheels? You know, what is your issue? And say very clearly, you know, the person that is in office and the Republicans in Congress that are there are making decisions right now that are going to impact your life, period. And so we have to be engaged and educate people about the victories. The fact that people rose up and had this effort of resistance that continues is the reason why healthcare, the vote was not repealed, and they didn't take the vote the first time. We have to get people mobilized again because there's going to be more work, and we have to keep going in that way. But we have to start from the premise that we have to connect to someone's life and what's going on in their life if we want for them to connect with us in politics. We can't continue to just hope and expect that people are just going to mobilize, because that's not how we all operate. You know, we get around into efforts and get involved in things that we enjoy or they matter to us. You know, I think the Jimmy Kimmel monologue was very powerful for civic engagement. You know, for him to get up and publicly talk about what their family was going through, and to say very clearly, no one should have to wonder about their child's life because if they can afford it or not. You know, then say, okay, well, if we want to be active, then we got to make phone calls. You know, we got to be out there. We got to push on these members, all electeds, at all levels, and not just at the White House. It's from the school board and the city council and the state house. All these races all matter. And so if we want to connect and get civic engagement to improve, we have to connect the policies to people's lives. You know, people believe that it doesn't matter who they vote for and it doesn't matter who's in office. And this might be the first time in a generation, if not generations, that it is so painfully stark the difference between President Trump and President Obama and the policies that were being implemented, and the impact that they will have on people's lives, that we can take that awareness to get people involved. But then what we have to do is make sure we understand people that have not been involved, we have to be patient with them. You know, you can't say to someone who just came into the door, I want you to make 100 phone calls today. You know, oh, hey, well, you know, what's manageable to you? What feels comfortable for you? You know, good job. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. And consistently then check in with them just to find out how they're engaging and give them the support that they need to be successful. You know, my career coach told me several years ago the three things to always do with a team is feed them food, love, and information. You know, and when you think about civic engagement right now, and a lot of people that might be getting engaged for the first time, you know, having some bagels and a pizza and some coffee and some pop in the room to get them in the room, you know, telling them thank you, and then explaining the end goal and why we're doing what we're doing, it will matter. You know, civic engagement also has to be treat people as adults. Explain to them, we're making 100 phone calls today because we know that we need to get to 1,000 phone calls by the end of the week, because that will give us a chance to be able to talk to every voter in this community. When we explain it to people, then they'll feel more ownership. What happens too often is we'll just tell people, we'll just go and get involved and go figure it out. It doesn't work that way. And so we have to maximize on that. But we have to, again, be very clear of asking people, really taking the time to ask them, what is your why? And using it as a reminder to them, and that's how you'll keep them engaged.
Great. Another question here. Could you repeat the article source about the Republican training? I guess the discrepancy between the training that the Republicans are doing versus the Democrats.
Absolutely. So there is a U.S. News op-ed that was written by Mark Riddle, which I want to say came out about a week ago. I think, April 25th. U.S. News and World Report. Mark is the president of the New Leaders Council, and it talks about 4 steps the Democrats must take to save the party, and a lot of it is around training, and the responsibility and impact as it relates to training. So yeah, that's April 25th rather, U.S. News and World Report. Phenomenal article, and I would encourage everyone to please read it and share it, because what I would encourage everyone is, I think all of us need to double, triple, quadruple down on more training. All of us are going to have more people coming into our orbit. All of us need more training, and it's finding organizations such as the New Leaders Council that can help with that training. And if anyone is interested, I can help do introductions to NLC to you, so we can figure out what's happening.
Perfect. I have a number of people here asking about just engaging the faith-based community. Specifically, Nadine's question is, would going in a different direction include churches in red states? That's where the GOP really has a leg up on Democrats in Oklahoma specifically, churches and tying the message to the Bible. So do you think going in a different direction for us includes churches, especially in those
Absolutely.
deep red states?
No question about it. Look, when we were at the White House, you know, Joshua Dubois, Michael Ware, Paul Montero, myself, Heather Foster, we were regularly talking to anyone across the country, because, you know, faith is about values. You know, I'm having this conversation right now between a Jewish and Palestine conversation that's happening between some Jewish leaders and Palestinian leaders. And I said, look, this is about our values, right? Like, all of us could find different articles, language, scriptures, verses that we agree or disagree with. But the question is, you know, how does this shape our values? You know, and whether if you're in Oklahoma and you're out west, deep south, northeast, you know, how does this shape our values? You know, it talks, the core of it is to serve the least of these, right? That's the core of this. A sermon I've been doing a lot recently has been based upon Something I learned around Christmas time. So my birthday's on Christmas, and so last year was one of the few times where Christmas was actually on a Sunday. So I was able to be in church on my birthday, which was a blessing. And the pastor preached around the nuance of the scripture around Mary and Joseph in the inn. And if any of you, and for those who are believers, I'm not sure with respect to faith, but this point will still make sense. Typically, if we read the scripture, it would talk about Mary and Joseph. It would say there was no room for no room. However, if you actually read it, it says there was no room for them. And what I've been talking about a lot is that right now, our values are to be fighting for them. Right? It's about helping the homeless. It's about helping there be better schools. It's about fighting for women's rights. It's about fighting for LGBTQ rights. It's fighting for all of our respective rights. It's fighting for them, whoever the for them is. And so we have to be more direct about it and out there. And for whatever reason, we have allowed the Republican Party to make it seem like they're the ones that fight for values. That's ridiculous. They're not. And I respect your beliefs and can disagree with your policies because the reality is I don't know how you can talk about the values. But then you cut on wheels. I don't know how you can talk about the values, but you want to cut the girls learn. I don't know how you can talk about the values and you want to eliminate the minority business development agency. I don't know how you talk about the values and you're trying to have this misogynistic language and rhetoric that's happening. And so we have to be clear of how values shape us as a person, whatever that person may be, of all faiths and atheists and agnostic, whatever your values may be, and be very direct about it. And happy to encourage people. Again, look at Joshua Dubois, D-U-B-O-I-S, and Values Partnerships. Look at Michael Ware, W-E-A-R, and the work that they've been doing respectively. We were all in the administration together, but then they've all of us out of the administration, obviously now, of how values shaped our policies and how we can go into these deep red communities, into the South especially, and talk about how values shape us. And shape us to mobilize in that way. And let's be clear, last thing, a lot of these deep red states, they had Democratic governors, right? They have Democratic elected officials. And so it's that even if someone may not be a believer, if you will, it doesn't mean you should allow someone to make it seem like you're wrong for that. And it seems like the Republicans have been trying to make it seem like they're the only ones of family values. Now, we all care about values. The question is, how do you demonstrate your value? And that's what we need to communicate.
Great. Another question here. Just some tips from you or some suggestions. What is the best way to work with the political arms of conservation and women's rights groups?
So I think for conservation groups, we have such a tremendous opportunity to talk about, again, the clear contrast that exists because of what's going on in D.C. and say, okay, how do we find more ways to have unity of the overall goal, even though we may have variance on the objectives along the way, and being very clear of what are we focusing upon? Are we focused on environmental justice, whether it be drought, whether it be air quality, whether it be just environmental justice as a whole, whether it be water, whether it be pollution, whether it be what happened in Flint and other places around the country. So let's be clear about how we're defining conservation, which obviously can vary in many different ways, and say, okay, now that we have definition clarity, now let's identify candidates and supporters who will be as closely aligned to what we've talked about for definition clarity, but let's understand they may not agree with 100% of our cause, and that should not be the reason why we dismiss them. For women's rights, similarly, there's a lot of range of conversation that's happening right now, but let's be clear. Women's rights is not just something that's as linear as it may seem sometimes, which media tries to make it seem. When we talk about equal pay for equal work, when we talk about education justice, when we talk about housing justice, all these things are intertwined in the same when we're talking about choice, right? And so we have to make sure it's an expansive conversation, the conversation of how do we make sure that we're empowering, creating more opportunities for minority women-owned businesses. Like all of these different aspects are related to that. And so similarly, again, let's be clear of what are our objectives. what we're trying to identify and define when we're talking about the rights of X group. And now, okay, let's then try to identify candidates and individuals and volunteers who are as close to the line as that as possible, so that while we may all be in differing viewpoints, we still have the same end goal of how do we move the cause further along. The best example I gave to someone yesterday is you think about the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The amount of organizations that had varied causes, but there was an overall cause around civil rights, right? You think about how in New York recently, we had changes to Rockefeller drug laws. A lot of different variants of what that could look like, but the end goal was the same. So as it relates to women's rights, it's important, very important, that we do not allow this to be a conversation just around choice, as critical as choice is. I'm a pro-choice Democrat. I've been very clear about that. However, I respect anyone who's a pro-life Democrat, because the reality is everyone has their different perspectives. I'm going to respect you. I'm going to love you no matter what. Same way I hope you'll love me. But we cannot allow that to be the only part of the conversation. It's similar to the conversations that happen a lot of times around the LGBTQ community, right? Sometimes people make it seem like, well, the only conversation around gay marriage. No, it's also around equity and justice in the workplace. Like there's a lot of different elements on why we talk about rights. So let's identify the organizations. Let's go back to what we talked about earlier, asset mapping. Let's identify the organizations. Let's identify the different outlets and entities. And then from there, let's mobilize, right? Let's mobilize in a very concrete way and be very clear what are the goals we're trying to achieve, right? And quite frankly, it's also our responsibility as party leaders to go and learn from these different organizations. Help us and educate us on the various of issues that you're working on, so it makes us better prepared to be able to build and grow a more collective, diverse, inclusive party in that way. We can't just continue to tell people what makes a good Democrat. All people have their different feelings and engagements. It's for us to respect them. So conservation, again, is the issues I laid out. There's a lot of variance that's going to be out there, especially when you think about all that's happening around with the EPA itself and the impact that it will have. Finding state by state, they'll have variance. Michigan, maybe talking about water. California, maybe talking about in terms of fires and drought, et cetera. It can vary across the country. Same thing on women's rights itself. Let's identify the different organizations. Let's identify the different causes. Let's have definition clarity. Let's figure out where the alliances that we can agree upon. Then let's create a game plan to identify successful wins along the way with that kind of strategy.
Perfect, thank you. And just a time update here, Vice Chair Blake. I don't know if you have a hard stop. I've been communicating with your staff, but we will take a few more questions and then we'll conclude the webinar at about 7:15. So about 5 to 10 more minutes worth of questions and then we will conclude. We do have a lot of questions and it's a great conversation going, so I want to make sure we get to as many of them as possible, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Perfect, perfect. So a couple more here. Let's see here. Do you have any suggestions for club structure that would appeal to all age groups? So as folks are building out the local party, how do you sort of get things that would appeal to all age groups?
Say that one more time. How do we appeal to all age group was the question?
Appeal to all age groups, yes. Engage the youth as well as engage people who have been around the party for a while and some seniors who are still involved in the party.
Well, I think first is issues for the most part, in terms of topically, are the same. They just impact us differently, right? What do I mean by that? For values, most of us, regardless of age, will have a value that everyone deserves a chance for a fair quality education. Most of us deserve that everyone, if you play by the rules, you deserve to have a chance for a good job with good working wages. Each of us, for the most part, will agree that there should be equity and justice for all of our respective communities. So age doesn't change that value, right? But age changes experience and perspective, and it's us respecting that on both sides. It's an understanding that how does it apply here? There's a dramatic difference in, okay, just having a strategy that's utilizing newspapers for our outreach to the community versus recognizing that you may have to have Facebook Live conversation to engage with the community. Recognizing that we might have just done robocalls. However, now we may need to go to the high school football game because we're going to meet more people outside there for a wider activation, so that then the high school legendary quarterback who was around for in the last 5-10 years recently that still engages the community can mobilize in that way. And so making the connection of, well, what are the issues that are emerging now that are relevant to you, and how do we make that intergenerational connection that we both can respect, right? So that intergenerational connection, that when we talk about civil rights, it could be Black Lives Matter now with Jordan Edwards or Alton Sterling or et cetera, or it could have been Emmett Till, and so we can still have that connection. We want to talk about immigration opportunities now, and what's going on in respective communities around ICE raids, or the elevation of remarkable leaders like Paola Mendoza, our leader, Garcia, all these remarkable leaders that are out there. Or on the other side, we can talk about what happened before and great leaders like Dolores Horta or Cesar Chavez, all the people that have been engaged in the movement in their respective ways. So we got to find the ways to make that intergenerational connection and have that respect that different perspectives are okay and it's a good thing. Different perspectives are okay, and it's a good thing. I love to listen to people on, well, how did you go through this before? Let's talk about how we're going through this now. Okay, how do we then have that shared responsibility, that shared value, so we have a shared benefit? And so it's the responsibility for all of us to say, you know what? In the same way, if I'm a seasoned leader, and I didn't want someone to judge me and look down on me when I was a young leader, then I can't do that to the young leader of today. And for the young leader of today, the same way that you want respect because your voice should be valued and respected and empowered is the exact same way that seasoned leader feels as well. And so recognizing that our experiences may be different, but our values and our feelings for the most part are probably the same. And we all trying to strive for the same end goal. We weren't asking ourselves what was someone's age if they were marching in the Women's March, or if they were participating in Black Lives Matter, or if they were standing up in Standing Rock, if they were standing up in Flint, if they were standing up for women's rights and all rights across the board, if they were standing up for gay marriage. We weren't asking ourselves, well, I'm gonna determine if you are right for this because of your age. We saw someone that was right in their values and their core system, and so finding that way for that mobilization and that connection, that is how we really change the game in an impactful way.
Perfect. Another question here. My southern state has a large African American population, but in the election yesterday, basically one of the primary African American wards didn't really turn out for the election. There were a lot of signs, but very few voters. Do you have any suggestions on how to further engage their African American population down in that southern state? Just some tips for getting them out to vote.
People got to feel invested. I use the analogy often. You can't holler at someone on a first date, not talk to them for 3 months, and then be surprised they don't pick up your phone call 3 months later, right? Like it's an investment, right? So yard signs is not an investment. That's a passive medium. Did we make 7 to 8 and 9, 10 phone calls to reach out? Did we go knock on their doors? Did we give people a clear reason why to go vote in the first place? Right? We can't just presume because someone's black or Latino or young and they're a Dem, they're just going to show up and vote for us, especially in special elections and elections that don't have the presidency at the top of the ticket. Like, you really got to give people a reason to get mobilized, right? And if it's not a candidate that they know, this goes back to the civic engagement question. Give people a reason to join a cause, right? Look at Ferguson, Missouri is a perfect example. When everything happened with Michael Brown, what didn't happen? They elected 2 new members of the city council. They didn't have a majority and minority city council leadership for the first time. So if we talk back here in the South, concrete tips. Number one, you can't just try to talk to the black folk and communities of color at churches. We're everywhere. We're not just at a church. We're all different places, and finding ways to have that civic engagement, even if you can't have a D associated with it, whether it be on the radio station and finding the local radio ally that can reach out to hundreds of thousands of people at a clip sometimes, depending on their radio show. Identifying the local validators on the ground, through the links and the alphas and all Greeks and respective organizations itself, but finding the different connecting points. What are the circles of influence? 100 black men, 100 black women, you know, but directly connect to people. What I try to always encourage people to think about, especially around base mobilization itself, is if I'm having a party, right, what are all the different ways folks try to reach me for that party? You know, because it's a good time, it's a celebration. Like people like to do things that they're excited about. Like they wanted to go vote for Obama because they're excited about it, they were happy about it, they were willing to stand in line. So if I'm having a party, I'm gonna call, I'm gonna text, I'm gonna write, I'm gonna talk about why this is a great party to go to. I'm gonna talk about why we have the best DJ. I'm gonna talk about why this DJ is better than other DJ. I'm gonna talk about how your life is gonna be dramatically different by the experience you're going to have right here. Like you gotta be excited about why people should vote for us, and have a consistency with the relationship. So again, concrete steps: increase activity with phone calls, not just robocalls. That's a passive medium. Direct phone calls. Increase and continual voter contact and knocking on the doors all of the time, even when there's not an election happening. So there's continual engagement that's happening in that way. Identifying new validators who may not be your traditional validators, your local radio host, the local sports leader, the civic engagement leader, etc. Number 4, finding civic organizations and civic engagement outlets that may not have the Democratic leaning publicly with it. However, if it's mobilizing people around the issue and a cause, it can get them involved in that way. And then, quite frankly, you know, utilize neighbors. You know, utilize the trusted voices. You know, when you're not there, when your state party is not there, your county party is not there, the neighbor is still there. You know, and who's that trusted voice? Who's that person on the block? Who's the uncle that sits on the porch that everyone listens to? You know, what's the barbershop beauty salon that everyone goes to and hang out on a Saturday afternoon, Saturday morning? You know, where's the dominoes game? Where's the spades tournament? Where's the Billboard tournament? Like we have to be creative. And the same ways that we would try to find people for this everyday interaction, we have to have that same kind of approach when it comes to elections.
Perfect. Vice Chair Blake, I want to ask one more question. I know that we're desperately running out of time, but just because so many people have asked it, and I believe I asked Jaleesa earlier. So just one 30-second answer here. How do we recruit people who are progressive and belong to those groups, but who may not be on board with the Democratic Party just yet? How do we blend the two or mold the two? And then along the same lines is that, how do you re-engage Democrats who were not active this last cycle?
Be very clear of the consequence of inaction. We don't have any excuses now, ladies and gentlemen. If someone's trying to figure out how to get engaged, be very clear with them. You have a Republican Party that is again trying to take your health care away, that has attempted to gut an ethics office, that has disrespected women, that has taken efforts to make student loans harder, has taken efforts to make it harder for you to afford a home. Be very clear of why voting for Democratic candidates and voting and engaging with our policies is better for them. The consequences of inaction. Be very clear about that. And so how do we mobilize people? Again, we have to be traditional and non-traditional how we do our outreach to everyone. So I'll tie it together and close it out by saying the following. First, I say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be on this training and taking the time to figure out new ways and different ways to go out and reach your respective communities. Recognizing that if we find these different ways, we can change the game. 1,042 seats were lost, Democratic seats of state legislators, congressional seats, all different races across the country in an 8-year span. 219 counties that voted for Barack Obama twice, then voted for Donald Trump. We have the people, everybody. We have to just be clear to tell people why we are fighting for them. And so explain the consequences of an action. And when you see someone coming in, especially if they're coming in for the first time, be patient with them. Coach them and train them and take a very serious look of the state budgets that you have and make a determination. How are we going to increase the training pipeline we have in our states so that it allows us to be more welcoming and supportive of those that are coming in? Again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send me a tweet at MrMikeBlake, at MrMikeBlake. Facebook is Michael Blake. You can see us there. Email mb79 at dnz.org, mb79 at dnz.org. And if I don't see you before then, I will see you at the executive committee meeting next month.
Great. Thank you so much, Vice Chair Blake. You're getting a lot of great feedback in our questions box. So I will let you go. I'm going to do a couple of housekeeping items here with our attendees. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you out in Detroit. For the rest of our T3 attendees, thank you all for joining. A couple of housekeeping items that I went over earlier in the webinar that I want to reiterate. If you all are watching our webinars with a group of friends and you yourself are not logged in to go to webinar to watch, we have no way to track your attendance. So please, if you're watching it with the group of friends, if you will complete the corresponding quiz just to let us know that you were on and paying attention, then that's the only way we'll know that you attended to be able to give you credit for the session. So please do that for us. And then if you are not receiving emails from us, our Friday emails or our reminder emails, you may need to actually register for the T3 program. If your state party is forwarding you the webinar registration link, then that means you're not on our email list. So please register for the T3 program so that you can get our emails directly. I'll include our program registration link in the evaluation following the webinar so that you all will have that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, some of the points that Vice Chair Blake mentioned, I will send those out to you. I'll try to send them out this Friday in our follow-up email so that you all can have them. They were such great points. I want to make sure that you all have those to take away from today's webinar. And so for a pop quiz, I know that you all are desperately waiting for that and also desperately waiting for dinner. So let me do a quick pop quiz before we get out of here. And then I will let you all enjoy the rest of your evening and your dinner. So one of the things that Vice Chair Blake mentioned is that and it's going to be a fill in the blank. People need to be contacted how many times before they remember a name? Whoa, and we are flooded with, I suspect you all knew that question was coming. We are flooded with answers. The correct answer was 7. Let me just see who the first person was. Margaret Reaper, I think R-E-P-A-R. You were the first there, so if you will type your address into the questions box, we will send you out a prize. And I believe I misspoke on the last webinar. One of our previous winners was from Tennessee and not Texas, so I wanted to give a quick shout out. I think it was John Patrick from Tennessee. Thanks for correcting me there. I wanted to give you a shout out for winning on our last Wednesday's webinar. So great job there. Thank you all for joining us. I hope that you all took a lot away from this webinar as much as I did. I was writing down notes as Vice Chair Blake was speaking. Again, we will send out an evaluation at the conclusion of the webinar to get your thoughts and your feedback on what you thought about today. So thank you. You have a great rest of your Wednesday. We will send out links to watch the recorded versions of these webinars on Friday, so be on the lookout for that. And we look forward to talking with you on Monday where we will begin our technology series. So have a great rest of the day and a great rest of your week. Bye.